It's the packet thrower! Welcome to the channel! Hey guys, today we're going to have a look at some of the newer features in Cisco Firepower. I show it from time to time in video to video and from course to course, but I figure we may as well do this as a fun way to do an update. So the first thing we're going to do is a basic setup, and we're going to get this topology here up and running. So we're essentially going to have two Firepowers in one site there, and we're going to run them as a failover cluster. And then we'll just have a basic switch and a PC to do connectivity. And then on the other side, we'll have much of the same thing, except for we'll just have a single Firepower, and this will just be so we can do some VPN stuff. So when that's all set up, we'll make some VTIs, which is a way of doing routed VPNs. We will play with dynamic objects, which is where we can use the API to dynamically update objects while pushing rules. And lastly, we'll play with the dynamic attributes connector, which is a way of pulling information from Office 365 or Azure or some other source and putting that directly into the FMC for your role base. Let's get to it. So I built out this lab in VMware Workstation. I normally just do this in CML or what have you, but because we're going to be doing it with desktops and Office applications and stuff, it was just easier to go this route. So what we need to do is we need to make sure the networking is set up between our virtual machines. So I'm just going to go to the settings of the first firewall. And what we have here is the mostly default settings. The only thing I've changed is I added a serial port so that we can connect with my secure CRT. Now, how Firepower works as of the current version is we have a management interface, and then we also have a diagnostic interface, which is how it sends stuff out for the management port. In newer versions, they're going to move this into what's called a unified port, so we'll just be back to a single management interface, but for right now, there's two. So your first interface is actually going to be the third NIC when you deal with virtual machines. Now, for simplicity's sake, I am going to just go ahead and use LAN segments, which are just internal networks that VMware network. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to go ahead and use LAN segments. These are just internal networks that tie VMs together there, and is handy for doing networking labs. And all these are really just text names there that you create, and then you just add them there. So if I added a new one, I just name it. So we're just going to call this FTD outside, because this is going to be common between all our FTDs. And then I'll also create one for the switch up to the Firepower. So we'll just call this PC1, switch 1, FTDs. And lastly, we'll need one from the PC1, switch 1 to the PC. So I'll need to do the same thing for the other side there. So I'm just going to go ahead and go copy. And then we'll do the same thing for PC. And then all we do is we select the new LAN segment. So the first interface is going to be our outside interface. And then we're not going to bother with DMZs or anything like that. So we'll just say that the second interface is going to be the interface to our switch. Now, there is a quirk here that when I try to attach this to another interface, it's not going to actually show up. So what I actually have to do is apply the settings and then go back in, and then I'll be able to pick the new names. It only works for the first NIC for whatever reason. So we'll just go OK. I gotta put this back to bridge and then go OK. And we'll go back in here. Okay, now I should be able to go back here and pick our new LAN segments. This will be the switch to the FTD. And then that's all we need here. And then we'll do the same thing for this guy here. So this would be outside. This would be the trunk to the switch. Now for the switch, I'm using Cumulus for this. So we'll just say the first one is the management interface, and then the second one will be like here. And then the third interface will be the PC. And you know what? We'll just make both of them the same zone. There we go. All right. And then for the PC, we just put this in the PC segment. And then I'll finish up and do the DC2 sites there just so we don't waste too much time, and we'll carry on with the configuration. All right, now that we have our VM stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and set up our first Firepower unit. So the default login is admin and then admin123, capital A. And we'll go through all the license stuff where we give away our souls. Give it a default password, and it has to be decently complex. So I'm just going to set up IP version 4. We're not going to bother with IPv6 right now. And for my network, that's going to be 10.30.10.181/24 and .1's my gateway. So I'm just going to call this EC1 FTD01. Point it to my DNS servers and give it a domain. While that's happening, I'm just going to do the same thing on the other guys. Enter the password. This one will be 82. I can't type today. There we go. All right, so for this one, we want to manage this centrally with the management center. You can choose to run them locally, but we'll look at that another day. So I'm just going to say no. Say no. And while we're waiting on those, we'll do the DC2 one. Password. This is lab. I'm just going to say this is 83. And I'll just leave the default DNS. You don't really need DNS too much for this kind of scenario because it'll learn from the FMC afterwards. But this is just the umbrella by default, Cisco umbrella. Oops, like so. And let's see if these are ready. Okay. So with Firepower, you can run things in routed mode, which is what you're going to do 99% of the time. And you can also do transparent mode if you want it to be more of a bump in the wire. But we're just going to focus on routed mode for today. Same change here. Should be about 30. So we'll say, oop, no. And then routed. All right. So this is the Firepower command line in all its glory. You'll notice that you can do some things in here, but you can't actually do configuration like you would on ASA or whatnot there. It's more just about giving it an IP address and doing troubleshooting. So what I'm going to do is tell it to use the FMC. So I say configure manager add. I give it the IP address of the manager. And then I give it a passphrase that this is a one-time passphrase that's used for the connection, and after that, it's not used for anything else there. So this can be as simple or as complicated as you want there, but in a lab environment, you don't need to get too fancy. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. That's not quite ready yet. And paste it in that. Now for the Cumulus, all I'm going to do is just log in. Linux. You know what? I think they changed it. I think it's just Cumulus and Cumulus on the new version. Yep. Okay. So I will give this a password. Okay. We do not want Z2P, so we'll turn that off. The Cumulus switch is a software switch that is now owned by NVIDIA there, and I'm just forwarding my lab mostly just because. But what we're going to do is just go ahead and set some VLANs and some IP addresses and get some routing going. We're going to go ahead and say NV set, and basically from here we can go ahead and set our interfaces and our bridge configuration. So we're just going to go ahead and first of all make sure our interfaces are enabled. So I'm just going to say 12.3 link state up. And then what I'm going to do is just say bridge domain, and then it is VLAN 10, and we'll say 252, and we'll set the untagged VLAN to 1. And then I should be able to go interface VLAN 10 will be 10. Oh, Hydra. There we go. 10 1, and we'll give 252. And then we just need to put the interfaces in that. So we'll say interface swap 1 will be uplink. So this will be, which I believe it is. Yeah. So completing VLAN. Oh no. 252. There we go. And then this one, copy, and we'll just say that this is in 2.3. I think that should be mostly it. We'll go ahead and set up OSPF here. They changed the syntax on me in 5.0 of this there. They used to do a different way of doing the syntax, and in this one they changed it up. But it's okay, we'll figure this out. And then I should just be able to go NV set interface. And 10 will be router OSPF. And area, we'll just put this in area 0, and that should more or less do it. Alright, so I think that's everything I want. I'm just going to go system, postname, DC1, switch 1, and then there. Okay, so if that all worked, I just going to go interface, and then we see here we have our interfaces up, and we should be okay here. So I believe I can go show config. And I'll just grab this configuration so I can throw this on the other switch. And then we'll jump over to the FMC. Okay, so let's turn our attention over to the Firepower Management Center. So when you first install it there, it's not going to ask you any root questions or anything. If you have DHCP, you can just go ahead and go to the browser, or if you want to, you can statically set an IP address. So let's give a login here. And we'll go through the license agreement, set a password, and we'll get this fully qualified name. So I'm just going to say FMC31, or rather just the host name. We'll do that with the fully qualified name later. And we'll say manual, and my system is going to be 180. I'm just going to go ahead and leave Umbrella as the DNS servers, and I'll leave the default NTP servers too. And we'll just say yes. Now I do have another FMC, so we can have a look at high availability. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Admin 123. This is going to be FMC 32. Manual, and we'll say 190. So at this point, I don't really need to do anything else in the command line. So I'm just going to go open up a browser, and I'm going to sign in. So the first thing it's going to ask you to do is register smart licensing. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You can choose to do a 90-day evaluation if you don't have a smart licensing account. If you don't have one, though, the problem is that you won't have the high encryption licenses because of all the export rules. So you'll have to get another license from Cisco and get that sorted out. But I do have a smart license account, so I'm going to open that up. I'm going to go to my licenses. And I'm just going to go ahead and grab this one, which I created with the API. So we'll go back over here, and we'll paste that in. And while I'm here, I'm going to do the same thing with the secondary node. Paste that in. And what I want to do is I want to go to integration, high availability. It's going to be the secondary node. I'm going to give this the IP address of the primary, and we'll register. Then on the other side, I'm going to do pretty much the same thing, except for I'm going to select primary. So that's high availability, primary, and this will be 190, and register. And then it's going to take a few minutes to run, so I'm just going to pause things. Okay, the high availability has finished syncing, so that means that this is ready to go. So anything I change on the primary is going to be replicated over to the secondary one, and when we register our FTD nodes there, they're going to actually get registered to both of the FMCs, so that if we need to switch over, we can manage everything seamlessly. If I need to, I can pause synchronization, so if I need to do updates or anything like that, if I need to break the HA, I can do that, and it's just going to wipe out the other node effectively. And I can switch between the roles there if I need to manage from one site versus another for whatever reason. Now, high availability itself isn't a new feature for Firepower. They've always had it, but they brought it to virtual appliances relatively recently. So it's just something to be aware of, that you can do this in your lab now. Before, you had to have the physical appliances like the 1600s or whatnot if you wanted to do this. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get our nodes registered. So we'll go to device management, and we're going to go ahead and create some folders. And we'll go ahead and create some groups for organizational purposes. So we'll say DC1, DC1. And DC2. Okay, so now we're ready to add a node. So let's go add device. Now for the host name, we're just going to mention the IP address, which is 181. And the display name is actually different from the host name. We can use the same value, which we will, but this is locally significant. So if I wanted to change this to something else, like say lab, is just informational inside of the FMC there. So you can have some flexibility there, but usually you just keep it the same as whatever the host name is supposed to be. Enter in the registration key. Now we do need to create an access control policy, and we're not going to put a lot of effort into this right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and call this temp, and we'll leave everything else the same. Now for virtual appliances, in the new version, they want you to pick which tier it is. So the 1 gig is V10, so I'm just going to pick that. And I'm just going to register all the features. And with that, we'll go register. Okay, I've that has been registered, and I went ahead and added the other two to save some time here. So now what we got to do is actually configure the devices. So we're just going to click on the first one here. And this is going to take us to the interfaces where we can add our IP addresses and such. So let's just do the first interface. And this one will be our outside interface. This is just the name of the interface. It can be anything we want, but you should probably try and keep it consistent with your zones or whatnot there, just so you don't lose track of things. Add a description if you want. And we do need a security zone, so I'm just going to call this outside. Again, you can name it what you want, just don't be silly. And what we're going to do is just give this a simple IP. That's going to be 123.11/24. And then we're going to do one for the inside interface. It should be 252.2.54. There we go. By the way, you can do IP version 6 too if you want. All right, so these interfaces are added. Now you can notice that when I hit save, they are going to be added under the global virtual router. And that is because Firepower supports VRFs in the newer versions. So if you wanted to try that out, we'll just pick an interface here to show you. We'll just call this VRF test. Create a note for it. We'll just call it lab. And then we'll just give it a random IP address. Doesn't really matter. We're not really going to be focusing too much on this. And we'll go save. So now this is done. If we go to routing, by default, we are in the global routing table for everything. If I wanted to add a new one, I just go manage virtual routers, click on add here, and then we're going to call this VRF lab. Give a description if you want. And then we just tell it which interface is going to be added. And you can see here, once we're in the VRF, we can configure our OSPF or ECMP or BGP static routes. You can actually do EIGRP, but they have that in a different section called Flex Config. They're fixing that in the next version coming up. So let's go ahead and go save. And we'll go back to our global routing table because I was just showing you that VRFs are a thing. All right, so you can see we have more options on the global routing table. You got like your multicast and so on and so forth, and policy-based routing, but VRFs can be handy in certain situations. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is configure OSPF, OS enable process. Now, by default, it's going to run as an internal router. If you want to be able to support redistribution, then go ahead and select ABR/ASBR. If you want to, you can control the router ID and logging, AD, basically anything you would expect to be able to change on ASA, you can. We'll go ahead and create an area. Now, by default, it's going to be area 1, so I'm just going to say 0 because that's what I put on the cumulus. And then for the networks, we're going to create one. We're just going to call this net. DC1, we'll call this transit. This would be a network, and just plan 100, 2x2, so that. And over here, we'll go ahead and create one for DC2, and this will be transit, network. So now you can choose to do something called allowed overrides. And what this does is let you have a single object, but you can have it change depending on what is deployed to the firewall. So if I click add here, I can pick the devices. So if I wanted to, I could say like this. And I can make modifications there. So rather than making two objects for DC, I could make one for transit and then have each firewall. But I'm not going to bother with that quite yet. So we'll just go back here and go save. Yeah, well, let's leave it as is. We'll just go save. All right. So we're just going to go ahead and pick which network is going to run OSPF. We're just going to pick this guy for right now. I could also just choose to do like private IP addresses if I just wanted to run on all IPs, or I could just have it run on all interfaces if we wanted to. You can also do virtual links and stuff if you want to there, but if you're doing virtual links on a firewall, you probably failed somewhere. So that's good enough for here. We're just going to go save. And we're going to also just add a static route. Now, we don't actually have a default gateway for our WAN here, but we'll just make one up. We'll just call this outside any, and we'll just say this is 10, 100, nope, say this is 20, 0, 1, 2, 3, 254. Now, because all these are connected to the same interface on my VMware there, it doesn't really matter because our firepowers will be able to reach each other and they won't need a gateway, but we'll just add it just for fun. You can also do route tracking and whatnot if you want to. You can also tunnel, which means that if you're connecting through a VPN, it will override your default route rather than relying on the routing table. But we'll just leave that as is, and we'll just go like so. Go save, and I think that's all the configuration I want for this. So what I'm going to do is just save some time here. I'm going to go copy this configuration to the DC2 so that we don't have to enter in all that stuff by hand. And then in fact, to make a few more changes here, I'm going to go to advanced settings and I'm going to enable application or automatic application bypass, which just means that when the IPS gets reloaded, it's going to be a little bit better. We're going to do some optimizations, which basically is going to group objects together when it's doing its database searches. And I think that should do it for now. Okay, so with all that done, we're going to go ahead and push the configuration. So we can either get the configuration from another device or we can push it. So we're going to push it. And I'm just going to select DC2. I'm not doing the other firewall because that's going to be a failover cluster for our high availability. So that configuration is going to get blown away anyway. Let's go OK. Say yes. It's going to take a minute to push there, but when it's done, we'll get a little notification here. There, it's done. So I'll go over to here. And if I click on DC2, we will see that all the IP addresses and such are copied over. And I just need to correct them so that they're accurate. So for example, this IP address will be 21. And this will be 200. And we don't especially care about the VRF, so we'll just leave that as is. And the last thing we need to do is, because we don't care about the static route, we just need to adjust OSPF here. So let's go here. And we're just going to add the other network. Now, if I did that override that I was showing you there, I wouldn't have to change anything, but here we are. And we'll just go save. Right, so that's all done. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and deploy the configuration. And now that's done, I can go back over here and we can make our failover by going to high availability. And we'll give this a name. UC1 FTD, let's call it cluster 01. This is always going to be firepower front defense, by the way. This is the old legacy stuff that you should never really be using anymore. And then we'll just go 1, 2, and continue. It's going to do a little sanity check. It's good. And we're going to pick some interfaces. I like to do the last two. Now, I never actually set these up in VMware, but they're all in the same bridge network, so it'll be good enough for our purposes. They'll be able to reach everything. Now, you can choose to have one failover. You can choose to have one interface for your high availability, or you can do the recommended two. I'm just going to go ahead and do two. So we're just going to say that this is 6 and 7. I like to give this a name. HA link. And the primary IP, let's get this some IP address that's out of the way. You can also choose to do IP version 6 if you want. Oop, I did that in the wrong spot. The secondary is 2, and there we go. So this will be HA state. I'll just use the next available IP. 6, and we'll do /30. You can choose to do IPsec if you want encryption, which is probably a good idea. So let's go ahead and say that and let it auto-generate a key. So that's good enough for me. At this point, it's creating the high availability for us. Now you notice there's no push or anything like that. It's just doing it. So keep that in mind if you're doing this in production. But basically what's going to happen here is if there's anything in the secondary node, it gets wiped out, and then it's going to replicate the configuration from the primary. Okay, that is ready to go. We can see that we have the first one being the primary active node and the other being secondary standby. So at this point, we just manage this cluster independently there, unless we want to do things like switch the active peer or break the cluster, that kind of thing there. We'll basically just treat this as one item there. When we do upgrades, it's going to intelligently do one at a time so that it doesn't cause any outages, or at least not as reduces the outages if there needs to be one. But anyway, with that out of the way, we'll just click on here. And we're just going to finish up this configuration. So we've done the interfaces and the routing. All we need to do is just give a standby IP for our interfaces. So we're just going to go here and just say 10.100.252.253. We just need to give it an IP address in the subnet. All right, take 173. It doesn't really matter. We're not really using it. That's a lab anyway. I like to give it the next sequential IP address if possible, so that it makes sense when we're looking at it. Say 12 here, and that looks good enough to me. We'll go save. And we can control when a failover happens if one of the interfaces fails, because you see how these are all monitored. So if we have an interface that we don't particularly care about, like say our VRF, we can tell it that we're not going to monitor this interface. And that way, if anything happens to this interface, it's not going to trigger a failover. Anyway, we're just going to go ahead and deploy this. Oh, I forgot to save. And we'll go deploy. Okay, and now that's done, let's just throw together a simple access policy. So let's go over to our access control. And what we'll do is we'll create a simple nested policy. So we're just going to go new policy here and go global. And here is where we can put rules that's going to apply to both of our data centers. So for example, I might say something like allow routing. And then we'll just say inside zones. And we'll allow OSPF, maybe ARP, and maybe BGP. Not going to worry about inspection for this, but you could set up the intrusion policy if you want to. And we're just going to go ahead and say log the connection. So now we have a simple global rule. What we want to do is create a rule that's going to inherit that. So we're going to go new policy, and we're going to call this DC1 outbound. Now our base policy is going to be global, and this is where we would attach DC1. This is going to change the assignment from the temporary one that we made earlier. And we can see we have our global rule up top. And then we can have our site-specific rules underneath there, and you can get really granular with this if you wanted to do like one for inbound rules, outbound rules, DMZ, whatever you want to do. I'm just going to go ahead and say allow traffic. Good typing. Allow traffic. So we'll say inside to outside, and we're just going to leave it at that for right now. We'll go save. And we'll actually copy this and call this DC2 outbound. And this one will be the same thing. We're just going to assign this one to DC2. At this point, we have our two rules, and we don't have any need for the temp anymore, so we can go ahead and delete that. Now we'll push our policy. Actually, before I do, I'm going to go ahead and make a simple NAT. We're just going to go to devices and then NAT. And threat defense policy, we'll call this EC1 NET. And we're just going to add a simple dynamic NAT that says if you're going to the inside to the outside, and the LAN is our 10 network. And we're just going to go ahead and add it to our destination IP. Oh, I have to actually select the one I created there. There we go. Okay, so now we have a simple NAT. And we'll do the same thing. We'll copy this. So for this one, be DC2. And we need to adjust the object to be the second one. Oh, I forgot to update that again. All right, there we go. We're going to go ahead and deploy our rules. So at this point, we should have our OSPF running. So I should be able to go show OSPF neighbor at our neighborship. And if I check our routes, we should be learning our LAN here. So that is looking okay. And then one more change we need to do is just adjust the routing so that we have a default route. So we'll go back over to management here. And we'll say we're going to advertise the default route. Okay, now that all the rules are in place there, I'm just going to throw an IP address on my desktop here. And I should be able to access the internet. Off screen, I did add another router there so I can get proper internet access. So basically, I just took a router and added it as the 254 address in the WAN. We could see that the home pages are loading. So we have internet access. If we go back to our Firepower and look at our events, we can see we're getting logs. So what we'll do is we'll leave the video here, and then in the next part, I will walk you through the VTIs, and then we'll move into the other features we talked about at the beginning. See you there.